What do you know about Canada? In this episode, we're going to put Canada under the microscope and look at some interesting facts and famous people that come from the second largest country on the planet. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello, my name's Craig.
My name's Reza.
And with over 45 years of teaching English between us, Reza and I are going to help you grow your grammar, vocalize your vocabulary, and perfect your pronunciation. Welcome to the podcast. How are you, Reza?
I'm tickety-boo, Craig. I'm feeling fine. And you?
What does tickety-boo mean for anyone who doesn't understand that colloquialism?
Anybody who hasn't got access to the 19th century in a time machine, tickety-boo just means very, very well. It's a very old-fashioned expression. Tickety-boo, I'm doing well, I'm fine.
I'm pleased to hear it. Before we speak about Canada, just to remind you, if you have not done so already, please give us a hand and help us by going to iTunes and subscribing to this podcast. Even if you're not listening on iTunes, it really does help us if you click the button and subscribe, because more people can find us and we can grow our listener base. And you can also listen to us on Spotify now, on inglespodcast.com. Just go straight to the website. And if you have an Android phone, you can now listen on Google Podcast, the new podcast app from Google on your Android phone. Reza, we have some interesting facts about Canada. Let's start off with the size of Canada. How big is it?
Canada is very, very, very big. In fact, it's the second largest country in the world after Russia. So Russia number one, Canada number two. But Canada has the longest coastline. It has more coastline than Russia.
It also has 6 time zones, so you could travel across Canada from east to west or west to east and actually cross time zones, changing your watch 5 times in 6 time zones. And it has 2 official languages, French and English,
as well as a few unofficial languages, which the Native American tribes speak up in the far north, but they're not official. The Inuits and other Native American tribes in Canada and the United States have their own languages, which are not official, but they're still spoken by a few older people.
That's right. And you caught me out a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you remember, Reza. To catch someone out is to surprise them, Pierre. So you caught me out by asking me the capital of Canada, which I couldn't remember, but of course it's Ottawa. Capital of Canada is Ottawa, which I think is smaller than the more well-known cities like Montreal and Quebec. Ottawa has about 1 million inhabitants, just a bit less than 1 million.
Yeah, both Montreal and Toronto are bigger than Ottawa.
Did you know that Canada sells milk in bags?
Until we researched this, I didn't. No.
Yeah, apparently if you go to a supermarket to buy your milk, you don't get it in a carton, a milk carton, or brick, as you might say in Spanish, but in bags, in plastic bags, which I suppose are easy to recycle, but maybe not very convenient when you're making your tea.
Now, you all know, I'm sure, that Canada can be cold, but did you know that the lowest recorded temperature was minus 63 degrees C?
Wow.
That's 63 degrees below freezing in 1947. That was recorded.
But I don't know if you've been in any very cold countries, but do you think when you get past maybe minus 10, do you think you really notice that it's getting colder?
I don't know. I don't have much experience. People say at round about minus 20. I think from minus 10 down to about minus 20, you notice.
That's when you stop feeling your toes and your fingers.
After that, they're all so dangerous, it doesn't really matter. You know, they're all going to kill you. Whether the number's 30 or 50 or 63, you're going to die if you're out in it for too long.
Yeah, but minus 63, that's bloody cold. That's freezing. I did not know this either, that Canada has more lakes than the rest of the world's lakes combined. So you take all the lakes in the world, put them together, you still don't have as many as there are in Canada. Amazing.
Yeah, of course, among those lakes, of which there are many, but the most famous ones are what we call the Great Lakes, where the Canadian and American border meets. So, Lake Erie and Lake Superior and all of those, they're kind of half American, half Canadian. Where Niagara Falls is, that area.
Yeah. And another interesting fact about Canada, it has the longest street in the world. It's called Yonge. I think it's pronounced Yonge Street, Yonge, or maybe Yonge Street, or Yonge Street, it could be, in Ontario. And it starts at Lake Ontario and runs through Ontario to the Minnesota border, a distance of almost 2,000 kilometers, the longest street in the world.
Here's another piece of information I found out, which I didn't know before. In Canada, they eat more macaroni and cheese than any other country. Weird.
Very weird.
Wonder why that is.
Macaroni and cheese is sometimes called mac and cheese, especially Americans like to call it mac and cheese. Do you like that, Reza?
From time to time, but I'm not a huge fan. I find it a bit heavy.
Yeah, and it can get boring if you eat it too often.
Oh, I've just had an idea, though. Maybe it's popular in Canada in the winter because of the cold, because I imagine it being a good winter dish because it's heavy, lots of calories, probably fills you up, right?
Yeah, lots of pasta and cheese, definitely. Now, I knew that Canada is a fairly safe country, that in many, many places in Canada, it's not necessary to lock your doors and lock your windows because everybody's nice and friendly and crime, generally speaking, is very low. But apparently in the very north of Canada, in a place called Churchill, people leave their cars unlocked in case the residents need to escape from polar bears. There are polar bears walking around Churchill, and it's a good idea to not lock your car so that if you see a polar bear, you can quickly jump in somebody's car to escape from it.
Wow, imagine that. There's more chance of being attacked by a bear than a person in some Canadian cities. That's crazy, isn't it? Prostitution, you might be surprised to hear, prostitution is legal in Canada, but buying the services of a prostitute is not. So it's kind of a strange area. It's not illegal to practice prostitution, but it is illegal to pay for the services of a prostitute. So how does that work out, I wonder, Craig?
I have no idea, but it reminds me of Spain, where I think marijuana, you can legally have a limited amount of marijuana, but it's illegal to smoke it. Is that right? So you can have it, but you can't actually smoke. Or is it you can smoke it, but you can't sell it? Something like that. But maybe prostitution is also legal in Spain, but you cannot pay for sex in Spain. Is that right? Because there are many places you see on some roads where there are brothels. So they seem to be legal, but I think the actual paying for sex is illegal. So I think it's similar here.
Right.
If any policemen are listening, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Craig, what about maternity leave? Whenever you're allowed to stop working but be paid when you're pregnant.
Well, do you know how long it is in Spain? Is it 3 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks?
I think it's a question of weeks. Certainly no more than 3 months. I think it's less than that.
But in Canada, it's a year after you've had your baby. You have paid maternity leave for a year. Do you think that's too long?
No, I think that's a good idea. It's generous, but I think it's a good idea myself.
Yeah, me too.
Now, everybody knows, obviously, the United States has states. The kind of the clues in the name, right? The United States of America. But Canada doesn't have states. What does Canada have, Craig?
It has provinces and territories. Provinces and territories. Similar to Australia, actually, also has territories, definitely. And France has provinces, doesn't it?
Yeah. Off the top of your head, Craig, let's see between the pair of us, how many provinces or territories could we name?
Ooh, off the top of our heads. Off the top of our heads means from memory.
Yeah, and we haven't prepared
without looking. Well, I think Quebec is probably one.
Yeah.
Ontario, is that a province?
Could that be one?
I'm not sure.
New Brunswick rings a bell.
Newfoundland?
Newfoundland. The one, because we had to study something about it in school, it stuck in my mind. Saskatchewan. Yeah, I'm not making it up. There's a huge area of land called Saskatchewan.
That's easy for you to
it's
say.
a territory or a province. Manitoba is the one called Manitoba.
That sounds familiar, probably.
And Yukon, or is that a river or something?
It's definitely a river. I'm not sure if it's a province. It might be.
You see, we don't really know much about the geography of Canada. Not many people do outside Canada.
And I bet many people didn't know that in Quebec there's a hotel made of ice. It's called the Hotel de Glace in Quebec. It's built every year. So every year they have to rebuild it from 400 tons of ice and 12,000 tons of snow. A ton is tonelada, I think, in Spanish. Every summer it disappears because it melts away. To melt is fundir or fundirse, and it's rebuilt the following winter.
Now, the police are very particular, very peculiar in Canada. Some of you probably do know about them. You may have seen them on films or documentaries. The mounted police. Mounted. To mount is to get on a horse. So the mounted police was formed in 1873 with 9 officers. Only 9 officers.
So there obviously wasn't much crime in those days.
Yeah. So can you imagine 9 officers and 9 horses, presumably as well. But in 1920, the group merged, they joined with the Dominion Police to become what was later called the famous Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which today has around 30,000 members. So from 9 to 30,000 is a pretty big growth.
Yep. And I know what you may be thinking. Where did Canada get its name from? Why Canada? Well, it got its name because of a misunderstanding. When Jacques Cartier, a French explorer, came to the New World, so he crossed the Atlantic Ocean to the other side, he met with local natives who invited them to their kanata, K-A-N-A-T-A. Kanata is the local word for village. So there was a misunderstanding. They thought the name of the country was Kanata or Canada.
So really, the country is called Village.
Yes.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Quite a big village. The second largest country in the world called a village.
Funny.
In local language.
Now, the sovereignty, the soberania of Canada is interesting. The head of state of Canada is, in fact, the monarch of the United Kingdom. So when we're recording this podcast, that's Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah, Lizzie.
The Queen of the United Kingdom, but also she has the title of the Queen of Canada. And she appears on things like banknotes and stamps and coins and that type of thing because she's the head of state. So Canada has a prime minister, but the head of state is the British monarch.
And I said before that Canada was quite a safe country, well, especially when you compare it with its southern neighbour, the US, because there's 3 times more violent crime per 100 residents in the USA than in Canada. So if you go to Canada, you're going to be 3 times safer than in the US.
Now, if there's one sport they really love in Canada, it's ice hockey.
Oh, yes.
They're not so much into grass hockey on the grass like yerba, but probably because I suppose the grass is frozen for half of the year, but they really do like their ice hockey. And Canada has won the Ice Hockey World Championships no fewer than 26 times. 26 times. Only one other country has beaten them. We mentioned that country before, Russia, the country which is also the only one which is bigger than them. By the way, Russia has won 27 times, so just one more than Canada. So you can imagine the rivalry between them.
And ice hockey in Canada is a national obsession. And the league that organises ice hockey in Canada is the NHL. Now here's a question for you that we will answer very soon. Who is the national hero of Canada who has more goals than any other NHL player in history. Do you know his name? We'll tell you in a few minutes. But before that, we'd like to speak about some other famous Canadians. Reza, can you think of any famous Canadians that maybe the listeners didn't know came from Canada?
Well, I didn't know until I researched a bit that Pamela Anderson is from Canada. I presume she was from the United States.
She was famous for Baywatch back in the day.
That's right. Well, she's not American from the USA. She's Canadian.
One of my favourite singers who died, unfortunately, a few years ago, Leonard Cohen, is Canadian. Leonard Cohen, famous songwriter and singer, died 4 years ago, something like that.
Not long ago.
Rest in peace.
Another famous musician from Canada is Avril Lavigne. Do you know much of her stuff?
I know of her. I don't like her music. I know she's really, really famous and very popular, but not my cup of tea, which means I don't particularly like her music.
Can you see already we've come across a kind of French-sounding name, Lavigne, because as we said, Canada has 2 official languages, English and French, so you get this interesting mixture of the 2 languages in people's names, in place names and other things.
The next person on the list is very famous, but I think his name comes from Hawaii, if I remember. Keanu Reeves. I think Keanu means soft breeze or wind from Hawaii. Obviously famous for the Matrix films series, and also his co-star in The Matrix, Carrie-Anne Moss. She's also Canadian.
Staying with the films, there's a few more people we could mention. The director, James Cameron, the director of Avatar, Terminator, Titanic, amongst other films, he's Canadian. You might have thought he was a US citizen. Not so. He's from Canada.
And Back to the Future. Some people are fanatic about that film series. Michael J. Fox, who later sadly got Parkinson's disease. Michael J. Fox, also a Canadian.
The famous comic actor, well, he's done serious films as well, but especially known for comedy acting, Jim Carrey. He's Canadian. Did you think he was American? No. The guy who did The Mask, The Truman Show, Ace Ventura, etc., he's Canadian.
And 2 famous Ryans, who you may be surprised to hear are both Canadians. 2 actors, Ryan Gosling, who was in Blue Valentine, and Ryan Reynolds, who starred recently in Deadpool, which is a very good film that I've recently seen. Ryan Reynolds, also Canadian.
Now, some of you who are a bit older might remember William Shatner from the original Star Trek, the original way back in the 1960s. You may have presumed he was from the United States. Again, no. William Shatner, who did Star Trek, and then later he did that series not that long ago, Boston Legal, was it?
Yeah, he also appeared in some recent Star Trek films as cameo roles. So they gave him a role in the film because of his fame in the original series. So he came out in 1 or 2 Star Trek, more modern Star Trek films.
Another famous Canadian.
Donald Sutherland and his son, Kiefer Sutherland are both Canadians, 2 very famous actors.
Matthew Perry, does that ring a bell? Does that sound familiar? If not, you probably know him as Chandler. Chandler from Friends, the guy who lived with Joey. You remember him?
Yeah, Joey was the one who was on Top Gear, and Matthew Perry, Chandler, they shared the flat together in Friends. Another famous singer from a long time ago, but I think still making music, Neil Young, is Canadian. Are you a Neil Young fan?
Some of his stuff, yeah. You?
Yeah, I like Neil Young. Also like Rush, quite a heavy metal band from the 80s. They're Canadian.
Oh, 70s.
70s, yes.
Early 70s.
70s, yeah, you're right.
They've been around a very long time, Rush.
Yeah.
Very, very long time.
I like Rush.
Are you such a fan of another famous Canadian, I wonder? Celine Dion?
Nope. She sang the theme tune from the title song from Titanic, and no, don't like that kind of singing. Do you like her?
No, but if I had to choose between her and the next person, I'd go for her. Who's our next person?
Justin Bieber, YouTube star and heartthrob. A heartthrob is a very attractive young boy or girl who becomes very popular in modern culture as being a a sex symbol perhaps, or a heartthrob. Justin Bieber, also Canadian.
What do you think of him?
Not much. Let's move to someone with a bit more talent. Michael Bublé. He's sounds like a bit like Frank Sinatra.
Yes.
Quite like him. Easy listening.
Easy listening. A modern day crooner, as they say. These kind of easy listening songs. The original guys from the 50s, 40s, they called them crooners. He's our modern day crooner.
My mum was a big fan of Michael Bublé. I'm a big fan of Diana Krall.
Oh, I like Diana Krall as well. I presume she was from the USA.
No, she's Canadian and married to another very good singer and songwriter, Elvis Costello.
Oh, are they married?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen her husband live, but I haven't seen her.
Have you seen the film The Blues Brothers?
Oh, yeah. That's a classic
Los Hermanos
film.
Blues?
Yeah, that's a classic. That's going back a while.
Well, one of the stars, Dan Aykroyd, he's Canadian.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. You see, this is the thing. Craig and I are native speakers of English. We're teachers, but we find it very hard to distinguish between American and Canadian accents. It's really hard to tell the difference if you're not a Canadian or an American.
Well, I never used to know the difference, but now I do. Shall I tell you my secret? The O-U-T or the O-U sound is different when a Canadian says it. An American English speaker might say about, and a Canadian English speaker would say about. It's almost Scottish. So when they say O-U-T, for example, out, it sounds like oot. So there's that different vowel sound with O-U, especially O-U-T. And for me, especially the word about, that, yes, that person's Canadian. Immediately I know. And that's the way when I'm listening to a Canadian for a while, I can now distinguish and tell which is the accent, American English or Canadian.
Well, you mentioned a connection with Scotland. That brings us to our next famous Canadian, Alexander Graham Bell. I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of him, and they thought, oh, well, he's Scottish.
I thought he was Scottish.
Well, he really was, to be honest, but he emigrated to Canada, like so many other Scottish people, and he did his best work when he was in Canada. So many people from Scotland emigrated to Canada. So much that there's a place that they call Nova Scotia.
Absolutely. And at the beginning of this list, I said, did you know the name of the national ice hockey hero who has scored more goals than any other NHL player? Did you get it? It's Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky, a wonderful national hero who famously said that he never skates towards the puck. The puck is the thing you hit. He doesn't skate to where the puck is. He always skates to where the puck is going to be. So he predicted where the play was going. And that's one of the reasons he was so good at what he did. Before we did this research, Reza, what came to mind for you when you thought of Canada? What did Canada represent to you before we discovered all these facts?
Ice, snow, cold weather, ice hockey, relative safety, not too much crime, amazing, pristine, unspoiled countryside, miles and miles and miles of forests and lakes with virtually nobody there. What did you think of?
Very similar things, beautiful scenery. The Rockies, because the Rocky Mountains also stretch from the US up into, or through Colorado up into Canada. So the west coast of Canada is a place I'd love to visit. Obviously French because of the French speakers there. The Mounties with the typical red uniforms, the mounted police. And yeah, same as you, the ice hockey and a very safe country with very nice people.
Now, Craig said he could tell the difference between a Canadian and an American accent with the about and about.
About.
I don't know if I could, but I tell you what, there's a few words which I know are different. Unless things have changed, they might well have changed. But in Canada, they used to say lieutenant, whereas in the USA, they said lieutenant.
Ah, okay.
So the Canadians did it like most British people. Most British people say lieutenant, and Americans say lieutenant. Canadian version used to be lieutenant, but these things may have changed because there's so much influence from Hollywood. But there were a couple of words that Canadians used which weren't quite the same as America.
So we've discussed how cold it could get in Canada. Would you be prepared to live in a country that gets that cold in the winter, or would it depress you?
I would find it hard, I don't know. I might be able to, but I certainly wouldn't be too enthusiastic, to spend months and months and months at sub-zero temperatures. I think that would be quite depressing. What do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind for a year or two. I think I'd quite like the difference after living for so many years in Spain. I'd find it interesting to live in such a cold climate for a couple of years, but more than that, probably no. I think I would get depressed and fed up with shoveling snow, moving snow, and trying to keep warm.
Now, Canada, like everywhere really, sounds quite idyllic, but has its problems. Which country doesn't? And one of the issues they have is the question of independence for the French speakers in Quebec. Some of them in Quebec would like to be independent, but some of them wouldn't. Tricky question. What do you think, Craig, about the independence of Quebec?
I don't know much about the specific situation in Canada, but I would guess it's very similar to what happened in Scotland a few years ago with a referendum, what happened in Catalonia with recently in Spain. So my opinion is the same. If the majority of the people in that area vote for independence, then perhaps they should be given independence. Just because we're in a democracy, go with the majority. Then that's my view. But I don't know much about the situation in Canada. What do you think?
I say the same as you. Whatever the majority want, let them have it. And what about the idea, which is related but not exactly the same? Some Canadians want to stop using the British monarch as the head of state and have their own president, whether they're independent or not. What do you think about that?
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, the British Empire now has reduced in size. It's not as big as it was. We're not controlling India and African countries anymore. So, yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, yeah, and I'm not a fan of monarchy in other countries outside of the UK borders. What do you think?
Same as you. Why not? Whatever the Canadians want, let's go with the flow. Whatever the majority say.
What does go with the flow mean?
Whatever most people seem to want to do, let's do that.
I agree. Well, we'd like you to go with the flow now and send us some feedback. So have you been to Canada? Would you like to go? Is there anything that we've forgotten to mention that you think is rather interesting about Canada? We'd love to hear your opinions and feedback on this episode. Please send us your spoken feedback via SpeakPipe. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast, or just record an audio file in MP3 and attach it to an email. You can send your emails to me, Craig, at inglespodcast.com.
Or to me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
Before we go, we'd love to thank our wonderful sponsors, starting with Bruno, our gold sponsor on Patreon, who offers walking tours of Copenhagen through his company, CopenhagenWalkingTour.com. Now, if you're going to Copenhagen and you're interested in seeing the city and having an experienced English-speaking or Spanish-speaking guide, then why not get in touch with Bruno, who offers castle tours of the city, walking tours around Copenhagen, and these tours come very well recommended. Also, if you're going to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Bruno offers tours led by local guides only of the favela area in Rio. Now, it's very safe, and the money that you contribute to the tour partly goes to help the community and give back to them to improve their daily needs. Go to Bruno's websites to find out more information, CopenhagenWalkingTour.com for Copenhagen and favelawalkingtour.com.br for Rio de Janeiro. Thank you to all our wonderful patrons who are supporting the podcast. Reza, who are they?
Ana Giovanna, Dana Constantin, Pachi Ibañez, Manuel Tarazona, Juan Carlos Rodado, Maite Palacín Pérez, Lara Arlem, Néstor, from Luces Extrañas, María Gervati, Lorena, Sara Jarabo, Carlos Garrido, Mamen, Juan Leva Galera, Corey Finneran from the ivenvy.com podcast, Miren Full, Jose Luis Arregui, Agus Paulucci, Mariel Riedemann, Manuel García Betagon, Raúl López, Rafael, José Manuel Fernández Picazo, Pilar Martínez, Gambati Blog, Igor Garmendia, Ignacio Espona, Kieran, Ana Ibarra, Marina Artiz Pena, Juan Carlos Pantín Fernández, Alejandro Pluma, Alex Cuadra, José Emilio Villena, Esperanza Colmenero, Emilio Manuel Martínez Ribas, Chema Santa Cruz, Ana Fernández Monterrubio, Carlos Cano Domingo, Gustavo, Antonio Díaz, José Antonio Muñoz, Eva María Elizalde Martínez, Arminda Fafo, Carlos Sánchez, Elvira Cortés, Francisco Javier Alejandra y Sebastián, Andrea Mío, Rogelio Menéndez, Antonio Lafuente, Eloy, Pablo Martínez, Miguel, Javier Correa Zambade, Alejandro Martínez, and Alejandro Ventura. And our latest patrons are Isabel Armada and Mar Carmona.
Thank you to all of those wonderful people for continuing to support the podcast and transcriptions for our podcast. You can join our Patreon program for as little as $1 per month, and by doing so, you get instant access to recent transcriptions, lovingly transcribed by Angelica Bello from Madrid. If you would like to join that lovely list, go to patreon.com/Ingles podcast. Thank you also to Patricia Alonso, who continues working hard transcribing episodes for you. And we now have episodes 1 to 22 and 131 to 142. Of course, not only Patricia, but there have been others who have helped us in the past, like Arminda from Madrid. Thank you very much. Alberto from Granada. Thank you. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week, in which episode we'll be speaking about what, Reza?
Next week's episode, forest.
So come and get lost with us in a forest next week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.